What happens when a leader becomes synonymous with his country, its wealth, and its decline? This is the story of Mobutu Sese Seko, the long-reigning dictator of Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Known for his authoritarian rule, vast corruption, and deep entanglement in Cold War politics, Mobutu's legacy still resonates throughout Central Africa. His rise to power, the mechanisms that kept him there, and his eventual downfall offer crucial insights into the nature of dictatorship and its impact on the nation. Understanding his story allows us to reflect on the lessons his regime left for Africa and the world. Mobutu Sese Seko, born Joseph Desire Mobutu in 1930, grew up in the Belgian Congo, where he joined the military and later worked as a journalist. His early experiences positioned him well in Congo's independence struggle. In the 1960s, Mobutu emerged as a key figure during a time of political chaos. The assassination of Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba left a vacuum that Mobutu quickly filled, using his military connections to take control of the state. Backed by Western powers wary of communist influence in Africa, Mobutu staged a coup in 1965, ousting President Joseph Kasavubu. His rise was not just a product of domestic politics, but also a result of Cold War geopolitics, as the West viewed him as a vital ally. Once Mobutu seized power, he swiftly moved to consolidate it, using tactics that would define his 32-year rule. He established a one-party state where opposition was not tolerated, securing the loyalty of the military through financial rewards and suppressing any potential threats. Mobutu's cult of personality was another key tool. He rebranded himself as Mobutu Sese Seko, adopting grand titles like the Eternal Leader and changing Congo's name to Zaire to promote African authenticity. Through tight control of the media and state institutions, Mobutu crafted an image of invincibility, positioning himself as a father figure to the nation. This consolidation of power allowed Mobutu to rule unchallenged for decades, but it also alienated potential reformers and entrenched authoritarianism in the country's political culture. Mobutu's economic policies were defined by mismanagement and corruption. In the early 1970s, he launched Zaireanization, a policy aimed at nationalizing foreign-owned businesses. While this was intended to promote local control, it quickly led to disaster as businesses were handed over to inexperienced and corrupt officials. Zaire's once vibrant economy deteriorated, and industries collapsed under the weight of mismanagement. Mobutu, meanwhile, became the ultimate kleptocrat, amassing immense personal wealth by siphoning off the country's resources. As the regime enriched itself, the Zairean people plunged into poverty, facing hyperinflation, crumbling infrastructure, and declining living standards. By the late 1980s, the country was on the verge of economic collapse, and Mobutu's reputation as a corrupt leader was firmly cemented. Mobutu's influence extended far beyond Zaire's borders. As a regional strongman, he played a critical role in shaping the politics of Central Africa. During the Cold War, Zaire became a key player in regional conflicts, including the Angolan Civil War and the Rwandan and Ugandan struggles. Mobutu's support for various factions in these conflicts not only solidified his regime's influence, but also contributed to the instability that plagued the region. By positioning himself as a crucial ally to both Western powers and neighboring states, Mobutu was able to maintain his grip on power. However, his involvement in regional politics also entrenched authoritarianism and contributed to long-term instability in Central Africa, leaving a legacy of conflict that persisted even after his fall. Mobutu's regime was a product of Cold War geopolitics, and his survival was deeply tied to the global contest between the US and the Soviet Union. Seen as a bulwark against communism, Mobutu received substantial support from the United States, France, and Belgium, including military aid, financial assistance, and diplomatic backing. Despite his regime's increasing authoritarianism, human rights abuses, and rampant corruption, Western powers turned a blind eye because of Zaire's strategic importance. Mobutu played the global powers off against one another, securing aid not only from the West but also from China and North Korea. However, after the Cold War ended, Mobutu's value to the West diminished, and he found himself increasingly isolated, leading to his regime's eventual downfall. Throughout his rule, Mobutu maintained power through brutal repression and systematic human rights abuses. Political opposition was met with imprisonment, torture, and in many cases, execution. Mobutu's security forces, including the feared Special Presidential Division, were notorious for their violent suppression of dissent. Freedom of the press was non-existent, and state media served as a mouthpiece for Mobutu's propaganda. International human rights organizations frequently criticized the regime, but Cold War politics meant that foreign powers prioritized strategic interests over human rights. As Mobutu's regime tightened its grip on the country, Zaire's citizens lived in fear, knowing that any opposition to Mobutu's authority could result in severe consequences, often without any recourse to justice. By the late 1980s, Mobutu's regime began to crumble under the weight of economic mismanagement, political unrest, and diminishing international support. The end of the Cold War meant that Mobutu's strategic importance to the West had declined, and foreign aid became scarce. Simultaneously, opposition movements grew stronger as Zaire's economy collapsed, leading to widespread discontent among the population. Attempts at political reform were seen as too little, too late, and by the early 1990s, Mobutu was facing increasing pressure from both domestic forces and international actors. His once loyal military began to lose faith, and a series of rebellions culminating in the First Congo War ultimately sealed his fate. Mobutu's health deteriorated, and by 1997, his regime had collapsed, forcing him into exile. The First Congo War, which began in 1996, was the final blow to Mobutu's rule. Rebel forces led by Laurent Désiré Kabila, with support from neighboring countries like Rwanda and Uganda, marched towards Kinshasa, Zaire's capital. Mobutu, weakened by illness and abandoned by his once loyal Western allies, was unable to mount an effective defense. The collapse of his regime was swift, and by 1997, Kabila had taken control of the country, renaming it the Democratic Republic of Congo. Mobutu fled into exile in Morocco, where he died a few months later. His fall marked the end of an era in Central African politics, but the country he left behind was shattered, both economically and politically, after decades of misrule. Mobutu's legacy is one of deep contradictions. On one hand, he was a symbol of African nationalism, but on the other, he became synonymous with corruption, dictatorship, and economic ruin. His long rule left Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, devastated, with its infrastructure in ruins and its people impoverished. Politically, Mobutu's regime set a precedent for authoritarianism and kleptocracy in Africa, influencing a generation of African leaders who replicated his governance style. The country's subsequent conflicts, including the Second Congo War, were rooted in the instability and fragmentation created under Mobutu's regime. Today, the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to grapple with the long-term consequences of Mobutu's rule, as political corruption and instability remain persistent challenges. Mobutu's regime offers critical lessons for both Africa and the broader world. His rule exemplifies the dangers of excessive power centralization, where personal loyalty to the leader outweighs institutional integrity. The cult of personality surrounding Mobutu highlights how unchecked authority can foster authoritarianism and destroy a nation's political and economic foundations. Western powers propped up Mobutu for decades, prioritizing Cold War strategy over human rights, which prolonged the suffering of millions. Mobutu Sese Seko remains a pivotal figure in African history. While his rule brought about economic devastation and political repression, his story is a reminder of the complexities of African governance during the Cold War. Mobutu's rise, reign, and fall illustrate the perils of unchecked power and foreign interference, leaving a mixed legacy of both caution and reflection. His dictatorship may have ended, but the lessons from his regime continue to resonate in Africa and around the world. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more content like this, because I have more than history and politics on my channel.